Last night during the State of the Union address, something slipped, not from the podium, but from the frustration behind it. The US trade chief made it clear, Canada will only get a deal if it accepts higher tariffs. In other words, cave, pay more, submit. And that tells you everything about where this administration stands right now. Because when a superpower starts saying you only get a deal if you surrender first, that is not confidence. That is pressure. That is desperation. But here is the part Washington did not anticipate. Mark Carney is not folding. He is not panicking. He is not rushing to negotiate from weakness. Instead, he is expanding. What just happened? Let's be clear about what just happened. The US Trade Representative publicly suggested Canada must accept higher tariffs to move forward. That is not how balanced trade negotiations work. That is leverage talk. But leverage only works if the other side needs you more than you need them. And that is where this calculation may be wrong, because instead of pleading for access to the US market, Carney has been doing something far more strategic. He is diversifying away from it. This is not rhetoric. This is policy. This is long-term repositioning. And that is precisely what is making Washington nervous. Listen to what the US trade chief actually said. When we go to other countries and we make a deal with them, the other countries agree that we can have a tariff on them, that we can have a protective tariff to protect our industries. If Canada wants to agree that we can have some level of higher tariff on them while they open up their markets to us in things like dairy and other things, then that's a helpful conversation. Translation: accept punishment for the privilege of negotiating, accept diminished terms, accept subordinate status. That is the offer on the table. Why the strategy is failing. Donald Trump thrives on leverage. His negotiation style has always relied on asymmetry. Pressure the smaller partner, force concessions, dominate the terms. But that strategy collapses if the smaller partner builds alternatives. If Canada can redirect exports, if Canada can secure markets elsewhere, if Canada can absorb the shock, then tariff threats become blunt instruments. And blunt instruments do not scare disciplined leaders. That is why we are hearing sharper rhetoric from US officials. Not because they are winning, but because the pressure is not working the way they expected. And who has everything to lose in a situation like this? Donald Trump. Carney's response. Listen to Canada's trade minister explaining the strategy. My job as a Minister of International Trade is to look beyond North America. Trade diversification, our goal of hitting $300 billion in additional non-US exports, is very, very important. And that's why this trade trip that's coming up is very, very important in terms of unlocking opportunities for workers. Now, this is where the story shifts from trade policy to leadership. Look around the world. When Washington applied tariff pressure, what happened? Some leaders rushed to secure exemptions. Some accepted temporary adjustments. Some quietly absorbed the tariffs. Some made symbolic statements and then moved on. But Carney did not absorb. He did not stall. He did not posture. He acted. And that distinction is everything. While others reacted to Trump's pressure cycle, Carney broke the cycle entirely. Instead of arguing about the tariff percentage, he changed the equation. He refused to negotiate from fear. He refused to validate the premise that Canada must accept higher tariffs just to sit at the table. And that is why this moment is bigger than Canada. Because in a world where global leaders have often recalibrated themselves around Washington's volatility, Carney recalibrated Canada away from it. That is not defiance for the sake of defiance. That is structural independence. And that is what makes this so uncomfortable for the US administration. The signal this sends because when pressure does not produce panic, when threats do not produce concessions, when a mid-sized economy does not blink, it sends a signal globally. It tells other nations that alignment with the US is no longer the only growth path. It tells markets that Canada is willing to withstand turbulence for long-term leverage. It tells Washington that the old formula, escalate, intimidate, extract, may not work this time. And here is the reality. This is not loud resistance, this is disciplined resistance. Carney did not respond with outrage, he responded with architecture. He did not fire back with headlines, he quietly built alternatives. He did not say we will not cave, he built a world where he does not have to. And that is far more powerful. Because leadership in moments like this is not about who shouts the loudest, it is about who builds the most options. And right now, Carney is building options. While others adjusted to Washington's gravity, Canada started adjusting its orbit. That is why this is not just another tariff story. This is a repositioning story. And in geopolitics, repositioning changes leverage. The trade mission. Carney's upcoming trade mission is not routine diplomacy. India represents massive consumer expansion. Japan represents high-tech industrial partnerships. Australia represents resource and security alignment. This is a triangulation strategy across Indo-Pacific democracies, and it sends a message. Canada's future growth will not hinge on a single market, not even the United States. And that is the structural shift that changes the balance. When a US trade official says, accept higher tariffs or no deal, it signals something important. They want movement, they want concessions, they want validation of their tariff structure. But if Canada refuses, if Canada expands elsewhere, if Canada absorbs short-term pain for long-term independence, then the entire pressure model weakens. That is the strategic chessboard right now. And it is not just Trump who is facing pressure. Ironically, the trade conflict may have accelerated Canada's global positioning. It forced diversification. It accelerated non-US trade agreements. It deepened Indo-Pacific alignment. It strengthened EU relationships. It hardened negotiation posture. And in politics, adversity often forces clarity. Canada now knows it must be economically flexible. That clarity is power. The results. Listen to the Trade Minister outline the concrete results. We promised Canadians that we will diversify, and what we're doing is leading to results. You talk about our trip to China unlocking $7 billion of agriculture opportunities in seafood, beef, and canola. You talk about Prime Minister Carney's visit to the Gulf, bringing back $70 billion commitment to build major projects across Canada. Our commitment to the EU and now being put into defence procurement opportunities. This is what it's all about. At the end of the day, it's about workers and unlocking opportunities. $7 billion from China, $70 billion from the Gulf states, defence procurement access in the EU. These are not press releases. These are signed commitments. These are alternative revenue streams being activated in real time. What this means. This is not a story about pride. It is not about ego. It is not about shouting matches. It is about structural repositioning. The US says accept higher tariffs. Carney says we will expand elsewhere. The US says this is the only path to a deal. Canada says we have options. And in global trade options, our strength. The real question is no longer whether Canada caves. The real question is whether Washington adjusts to a Canada that is no longer dependent. Because this is not just a trade dispute anymore. It is a shift in economic alignment. And the consequences of that shift will define North America for the next decade. If you want analysis that goes beyond headlines and breaks down the real geopolitical chess moves shaping Canada's future, this is your channel. Subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay ahead of every shift in this evolving trade battle. And now I want to hear from you. Is Carney's diversification strategy the right long-term move, or should Canada prioritize repairing ties with Washington first? Let me know in the comments.